Well, welcome to the Industrial Decarbonization and Emissions Reduction Demonstration to Deployment Notice of Intent webinar. We are very excited to have you all here today, and thank you so much for joining to learn more about this upcoming funding opportunity. I am Christina Walrand. I lead stakeholder engagement for our industrial and advanced nuclear programs within DOE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. So before we get into the presentation and I introduce some of my colleagues who are here with me today, let me cover a couple of housekeeping items. So this Teams webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations website. So all participants, all of you, are currently in listen-only mode. So for your awareness, all attendee names are visible to you right now, but they won't be visible in the recording. If you would like to turn on live captions, click on 3 dots for more in the top banner and select Turn on Live Captions. We're not taking questions and feedback today. However, we include a link to the Industrial Demonstrations program at the end of this presentation, and there are a number of ways to get more information in this, in the content we're about to talk through today. And then finally, these slides, a copy of today's presentation will be posted on our webpage by Friday, and then the recording of today's session will be available on the same page in a few weeks. So next slide. You'll bear with me a bit more on the disclaimer front. So the purpose of this webinar is to raise awareness about the recently released Notice of Intent. Only publicly available information provided in the Notice of Intent will be discussed in this webinar. So the Notice of Intent is for informational purposes only. We are not seeking comments on the information, and applications are not being accepted at this time. Attending this webinar and watching the recording, it's completely voluntary. It won't impact an application. There are no advantages or disadvantages with respect to attending the webinar today. The webinar is not a rule or regulation. If there are any inconsistencies between the Notice of Intent and the statements in this webinar, the Notice of Intent is the controlling document and should be referred to. So with that, next slide. Before we get started, I want to set the stage for today's presentation and this opportunity as we see it. So we really feel that this opportunity gives the United States a fundamental opportunity to lead the world in the next industrial revolution by addressing some of our most difficult to abate emissions. And we view that we have an incredible chance to accelerate high impact and large scale transformative projects in our nation's industrial sector. Our hope is that this funding will garner notice in boardrooms across the country so that we can accelerate decarbonization projects that companies are tackling so that you can move some of the goals that you had for the decades to come up sooner. And we believe that this will give us an opportunity not just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to showcase U.S. leadership in industrial innovation and position American companies as leaders in a clean economy. Next slide. So before we get started, I'd like to describe at a high level the goals for the webinar today. So first, I want to introduce you to the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. We're a new office, we have a unique mission space, and I know it can be really helpful to put that in context with where our mandate fits within the Department of Energy. And then next, I'll introduce my colleague, Jeremy Leong, who's our Industrial Demonstrations Program Manager, and he'll describe the Industrial Demonstration to Deployment funding opportunity through details from the Notice of Intent. After Jeremy, you're going to hear from Jill, who's one of our energy justice liaisons on community benefits planning. And then finally, I want to come back and wrap up to give some context about where you can find other opportunities around the department. There's a wealth of information for the industrial sector these days, and we want to make sure that you are aware of all of it and know where to find additional information. So first, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. So I think we can go 2 slides. Next slide. So let's start with our mission space. And I actually think this is fairly important when it comes to putting context around what we're trying to do with projects. So our mission is really to deliver clean energy technology demonstration projects at scale in partnership with the private sector. And so let me pause there. And I want to emphasize the importance of this clause in the mission, because the partnership with the private sector is absolutely critical for the work that we are trying to do. We can't accomplish our mission without you, and so we want to work closely with you to truly understand opportunities that you're seeing, constraints and challenges that you're facing. And We know that really understanding these pieces as we work through projects will be critically important to accomplishing the second part of this mission statement, which is to accelerate the deployment, market adoption, and equitable transition to a decarbonized energy system. So we often talk about our objective, not just to build the first 1, 2, 3, or 4 of a kind of a technology at commercial scale, but to build those few projects, depending on the part of our portfolio, in such a way that the private sector can pick up and build the next 5 to 100. And so we know that integrating these pieces is really critical to solving for the questions that you all are going to have as you look at some of these technology opportunities. So the equitable transition to a decarbonized energy system, it's a really important component, and that's why part of our presentation today focuses on community benefits planning. And so you'll hear more on this from my colleague Jill in a little bit. So next slide. I want to put our mission statement in context. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our mandate. So, we really seek to become a center of excellence for clean energy demonstration projects and project management oversight within the department. A really important component of our mission space is to deliver full-scale clean energy demonstration projects, and these are often really complex projects. And so that's where this really fits in. We're also centering the goal of meeting carbon goals through an equitable energy transition. And so this is to help enable the 100% clean electricity by 2035 and net zero emissions by 2050 through an equitable energy transition. And follow-on investment, which I think is spoken to quickly in our mission statement and the scale-up components, it's really at the core of our work. So I'll talk a little bit about our funding and our technology spaces. And though it sounds like a lot, we take very seriously the importance of stewarding these funds well. And so we recognize as well that to meet the scale of the challenge that we're facing, we need to unlock $1 trillion in clean energy follow-on investment from the private sector and other sources of capital. And so this comes back to the importance of partnering closely with industry as well as other stakeholders that will really be critical to our success. I think risk is a really important piece to talk about as well. It's inherent to any new technology, and it's one of the reasons why the department is working on funding the technologies in the industrial sector as well as others. We are really looking across our portfolio to actively manage risks as we bear some of the risk in de-risking new technologies for the private sector. And then finally, engagement and outreach, which is why I have my role within this office. It's really critical to the work that we do. So my objective is to establish strong two-way communication with stakeholders like you. So yes, that's to raise awareness about opportunities like this one, but also it's important to integrate the information, the answers to some of the questions that I've been describing so that we can help meet our technology commercialization, engagement, and scale-up missions. Next slide. Okay, this slide can be a bit of an eye chart, but I actually think it's quite helpful in placing OCED in context of the department's traditional mission. So rather than reading the slide, although of course you're welcome to, I think the important thing to take away is that if you look at the bars, you see a lot of weight to the left side of your screen, and that's because the department has traditionally and really continues to be a world leader in advancing research from the earliest stages up through the commercial and up through the pilot scale demonstrations, excuse me. And then we have a suite of deployment opportunities as well, and ways to help industry take up once technologies have been de-risked. But there's a really critical innovation gap that our office seeks to fill. And it's born out of the recognition that once technologies are proven at the pilot scale, they're often perceived or actually too risky for adoption by the private sector. And so I do want to say that the chart should be thought of as a guiding continuum rather than prescriptive, but generally speaking, by the time a technology comes into OCED, a lot of the technical and project risk should be proven out. Our role is really to address the risk factors of commercial scale demonstrations and market adoption, such as regulatory and permitting risk, first mover disadvantages, and cost, of course. And I also think another important point to make with this slide is the importance of feedback loops within the department. So we work really closely with our sister offices, applied offices, deployment-focused offices, so that we can understand the challenges and opportunities that they're seeing, and also work hand in hand with them to address some of the earlier and later scale technical questions that might come up as we execute our work. So just a pin in that I'm going to talk a little bit later in this presentation about where to find some of those additional opportunities if you're interested. So next slide. So I mentioned before OCED scope and our funding level. So we're a multi-technology office, and we've been tapped by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act for more than $25 billion in programming. And like I said, close collaboration across the department is really critical. So you'll see on this slide that we're working on a range of programs that might impact the industrial sector. And I can imagine that learnings from these programs will be important to many people on the call. Regional clean hydrogen hubs, carbon management, long duration energy storage, and more. And though we'll focus today on the industrial demonstrations program and this notice of intent, I would encourage you all to take a look at some of these other pieces and stay tuned for additional information if they're parts of our office that you're interested in. So next slide. I would encourage you, if you're interested in any of the programs you saw on the last slide, and frankly, this one as well, to visit our website to learn more. The best way to get news about what's going on with us is to sign up for our newsletter, which is available via this link. Again, the slides will be posted, so you can click through and look at the live links. There are a number of others within this presentation as well. You can also view our funding opportunities, including requests for information, notices of intent like this one, on OCED Exchange. And then once you're registered for Exchange, you can self-nominate to be a merit reviewer, which we would encourage you to do. We have a lot of need for experts as we move forward with all of the great programs that we're working on. So next slide. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jeremy Leong, who is going to talk a little bit more about the Industrial Demonstration Program and this Notice of Intent. So Jeremy's our Industrial Demonstrations Program Manager, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Christina. It's really great to be here today. And I wanted to first personally thank all of you for taking the time to join us. I counted almost nearly 550 attendees live, and hopefully many others seeing this, the recording after the fact. So let's go to the next slide, please. As Christina said, you will be integral to our execution of this program, and it's an absolutely incredible opportunity. We have up to $6.3 billion to demonstrate transformational technologies necessary to decarbonize energy-intensive industries. So what this means is that we can really drive a competitive edge for the United States in low and net zero carbon manufacturing technologies. And at the same time, we can help build a market for green products through high impact replicable solutions. Next slide, please. That said, we know this is no easy challenge. It's a pretty heavy lift. The United States industrial sector accounts for nearly a third of our nation's emissions, and moreover, it's considered difficult to decarbonize due to the diversity of energy inputs, the heterogeneity of industry, and the fact that emissions not only comes from heat and power, but also the fundamental processes and chemistries that create materials themselves. So our colleagues at the former Advanced Manufacturing Office undertook a strategic road mapping exercise with many stakeholders, and some of whom are likely here today. So if you're on the line, thank you for your input. They chartered the necessary technology development pathways, what some refer to as the pillars, for meaningful decarbonization, including energy efficiency, which can provide near-term opportunities without major changes to the industrial processes, electrifying processes that currently rely on combustion, low carbon fuels and feedstocks, and energy sources to decarbonize process emissions as well as heat. And then for the emissions that can't be abated through other means, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Through this program, we anticipate having an opportunity to fund new technologies along these pathways. But I wanted to also state that these pathways are interconnected in many cases, and taken together offer the potential to accelerate industry towards net zero. Next slide, please. So the industrial decarbonization roadmap that I described in the previous slide focused on some of the most energy intensive industrial subsectors because they have some of the greatest decarbonization challenges. And for this funding, Congress too has prioritized these subsectors. If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, that act provides that eligible facilities include domestic, non-power industrial or manufacturing facilities engaged in energy-intensive industrial processes. And these include iron, steel mill products, aluminum, cement and concrete, glass and ceramics, pulp and paper, chemicals, as well as other energy-intensive industrial sectors. So OCED is also interested in cross-cutting opportunities, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Next slide, please. So we recognize that there are quite a few subsectors on that previous slide, and we know there are a great many potential technology approaches that could be of interest. So when you think about the program priorities, there are three main areas of priority consideration. The first being decarbonization, including both direct facility and product level GHG emission reductions, as well as industry-wide potential for GHG emissions reduction. The second being uptake potential, including the financial and market viability, with a priority for green market purchasers. So tying back to our mission in OCED, the ability of the technology to be replicated and adopted by other facilities will also be taken into consideration. And then finally, the third being community. And that includes the projects that could create the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people in the location's vicinity. So my colleague, Joe Capitasto, will devote her section of the presentation to providing additional details about this topic. But at a very high level, we'll be looking at community and labor engagement, creation and retention of quality jobs, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, whether the benefits flow to disadvantaged communities, and the potential for air quality improvements and harm reductions. Next slide, please. So this slide captures our anticipated program scope. At a very high level, you'll see that we're looking at a wide-ranging suite of opportunities here. And we hope that many of you will see the potential projects you had in mind. The bipartisan infrastructure law on the left side of the page here provides $500 million for this program. Using this funding, we anticipate funding somewhere around 2 to 10 projects at a range of in the vicinity of 10 to maybe $250 million per project. And unless otherwise specified in the FOA itself, DOE will require at least 50% non-federal cost share per project, since these are demonstrations. All of the dollar figures you see on this slide represent federal share, which means that the total project cost will actually be at least double. This project type has no funding deadline, and we anticipate supporting facility level projects with larger end of this funding scale. And then at the lower end of the funding scale, we may anticipate having the opportunity to support testing and validation for emissions reducing technologies. So on the right side of this chart here, the Inflation Reduction Act provides the bulk of the funding with about $5.8 billion. And for these funds, we anticipate funding somewhere between 35 and 75 projects at a cost of around $35 to $500 million in federal share. Again, these projects have a minimum cost share requirement of 50%. So the total project cost will at least double the amount here. An important thing to know about the Inflation Reduction Act is that the funds have a deadline attached. We're expecting these projects to demonstrate an ability to pass critical risk milestones by the end of September 2026. And the FOA will have a lot more additional detail on this. But in this case, we anticipate funding commercial scale deep decarbonization demonstrations, including both overhauls and unit process retrofits at existing facilities and or brownfield sites. We can also fund cross-cutting approaches at multiple facilities, either through a common technology base or approach or similar infrastructure. Again, these are just the areas we're anticipating, so stay tuned for the FOA, which will have a lot more detail. Next slide, please. So we've been able to describe in the notice of intent a few additional factors that we anticipate considering as we evaluate application. The first being programmatic considerations. And those will include the technical merit and impact, the financial and market viability of the solution, the project's work plan, the team and partners, and the community benefits plan. We anticipate providing awards to teams led by a single entity, what we refer to as a prime, though all applicants are encouraged to partner with experts as you develop your applications. This can be particularly helpful for technical engineering support or analysis, life cycle analyses, and community benefits. Again, there will be more information in the FOA, but we hope that this can at least get you started as we think about projects. Next slide, please. Now, for our anticipated timeline, you'll see here that the exact time frame is very notional, and a lot of this will be published in the FOA itself. On the top here of the timeline, you'll see DOE activities, and on the bottom, the industry activities. We anticipate releasing our funding opportunity announcement in the March timeframe. We will likely require concept papers. Now, concept papers allow us to evaluate projects described at a very, very high level and will be required in order to submit the full application. After a review period of the concept papers, we will issue encourage and discourage notifications to the potential applicants. And although the discourage notification wouldn't necessarily preclude anybody from submitting a full application, we hope that this phase provides early feedback and really helps address some of the workload associated with pulling together a full application. And then after issuing encourage discourage notifications, we anticipate accepting full applications. We'll review the responses and announce the selections sometime, again, notionally late 2023 calendar year. So I do want to say, just note again that these dates are approximate and really subject to change. Next slide, please. Okay, at last, what happens if a project is selected? At OCED, we're taking a standardized project management approach. And so after negotiations, you'll see that we have a 4-phased process for each project, starting with the detailed project plan, and then moving into development, and then construction, and then finally ramp up in operation. You'll see that we will be evaluating regularly the projects on a go-no-go decision point throughout the life cycle of the project. And we anticipate looking at 5 areas. A few of these I think you would expect is engineering, procurement and construction, the permitting, and safety and the technical data and analysis. But I also want to highlight that we'll be looking at the business development and management or market uptake factors, as well as community benefit plans throughout the life cycle of the project. And then finally, on the bottom here, independent project review teams comprised of the industry experts that we pull together, tailored specifically to each project, will conduct regular evaluations in accordance with our office's commitment to demonstration project management oversight. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jill Capitasto. Jill is an energy justice liaison in our office, and she'll discuss the community benefits plan and the environmental and energy justice components of the applications. Jill?
Thanks, Jeremy. So on the next slide, we'll just get started. As Christina highlighted at the top of the hour, we have an unprecedented opportunity here to lead the world in the next industrial revolution by addressing our most difficult to abate emissions. And at OCED, part of our mission is to accelerate the equitable energy transition to a decarbonized energy system. So this means that equity and justice must really be a central focus of that energy transition and of the next industrial revolution. And as we here at OCED strive to become a center of excellence within the federal government in advancing energy and environmental justice in these large-scale demonstration projects, we are requiring that all projects incorporate plans for community and labor engagement, quality jobs and workforce development, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and the and energy and environmental justice as supported by the Justice 40 initiative. And I'll speak more about all of those requirements in a minute, but just want to highlight that all OCED programs are covered under the Justice 40 initiative. And this is an initiative that was established in January 2021 through the Executive Order 14008. And it sets a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. So this includes investments in clean energy, climate change, and workforce development. And I just want to highlight that we're referring to 40% of the benefits of this funding, not 40% of the funding itself, flowing to disadvantaged communities. And the next slide covers what we mean by disadvantaged communities. So to help project applicants identify communities that qualify as disadvantaged, DOE has developed a definition and tools, including the Disadvantaged Communities Tracker, which is shown here in the screenshot. To be considered a disadvantaged community, a census tract must have at least 30% of its households classified as low income. Additionally, it must rank in the 80th percentile of the cumulative sum of 36 burden indicators. These burden indicators include fossil dependence, energy burden, environmental and climate hazards, and socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And I would really encourage you to look at the Disadvantaged Communities Tracker to explore these indicators in more depth. DOE will also recognize disadvantaged communities as defined and identified by the White House Council of Environmental Quality's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. Next slide. Advanced industrial technologies supported by this program will reduce greenhouse gases. They also can and should provide meaningful benefits to host communities and workforces beyond these greenhouse gas reduction. New technologies can help reduce the criteria air pollutants that can be produced by industrial processes, helping mitigate their harmful impacts on respiratory and cardiovascular health. To support these and other benefits, DOE will require all applicants to create a community benefits plan, which has been mentioned a couple times in this presentation, that covers 4 standard topics that we mentioned earlier. This is community and labor engagement, workforce development and quality jobs, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and the Justice 40 initiative. More details about the requirements for the community benefits plan will be included in the FOA, and alongside the FOA, we'll publish guidance documents to support applicants in developing their plans. And there are some guidance documents that have been published for already released FOAs that are available on OCED Exchange for people who are interested in seeing what the structure of these plans and those guidance documents are. The community benefits plan will be implemented and updated during each project phase and will be included in go, no go decision criteria. Next. The community benefits plan guidance documents will help applicants move their plans from vision to implementation by providing additional information, clear examples related to industrial emissions, and resources that can support applicants in developing strong assessment, goals, and outcomes related to community benefits. The guidance document will be provided under the application documents section on the OCED Exchange website, as I've mentioned already. And applicants are encouraged to read that guidance document and the frequently asked questions page, which is highlighted here on the slide, prior to writing your community benefits plan, just to have the most information and resources available to make that a strong plan. Next slide. So to close out the webinar, let me bring back Christina to provide context, considerations, and next steps.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks, Jeremy. So I hope this information has been helpful and has shaped your understanding of the notice of intent as well as the community benefits plan. So next slide. So the Department of Energy, as I mentioned earlier, we have many, many resources for industry. And so this notice of intent, it's just one piece of many interconnected programs that we hope you'll leverage. So on this slide, and as I mentioned earlier, these slides will be posted with live links, but we've included 3 offices in addition to OCED that you should explore. So our partners in the Office of the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation focus on research and development for early and mid-stage technologies, as well as lab and pilot scale demonstrations. They also have a robust suite of technical assistance programs, as well as institutes and hubs that are focused on specific technical challenges. So many on this call may have been familiar with the Advanced Manufacturing Office, which recently split into the Industrial Efficiency and Decarbonization Office, or IEDO, and the Advanced Materials and Manufacturing Technology Office, or AMTO, because we love our acronyms. But this really reflects the huge mission space of these 2 offices and just the critical nature of their work as we look at accelerating a clean energy transition. So IEDO is focused on innovation and adoption of cost-effective technologies that eliminate industrial greenhouse gas emissions. And AMTO is really looking at helping the U.S. build energy-related materials and manufacturing technologies to increase competitiveness in a decarbonized and clean economy. And so then finally, the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, or MESC, is our sister office and a partner on this notice of intent. And so MESC strengthens and secures manufacturing and energy supply chains that are really needed to modernize our nation's energy infrastructure. And they also work on a clean and equitable energy transition. So these MESC has programs for domestic clean energy manufacturing and workforce capabilities and opportunities that are focused on small and medium enterprises and communities. So again, I really encourage everyone to check out these resources as well. Next slide. To provide some opportunity context for this notice of intent, I've brought back the header from the eye chart that we showed you before, but it really is the research, development, demonstration, and deployment continuum, and have tried to chart here some of the opportunities to give you just a little bit more context to where this notice of intent, represented by the yellow star, sits within the department. And this slide also highlights some additional opportunities within the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations that you may want to look at. But you'll see here that some of our partner offices in the Office for the Undersecretary of Science and Innovation, AMTO and IEDO, have released a number of opportunities that get at the research development and then early stage demonstrations. So then, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, our office really comes in at the full scale, commercial scale demonstration piece. And like I said before, there are other parts of the program that could be of interest, especially around carbon capture and hydrogen hubs. And then the deployment side, which really has so many resources that I want to encourage folks to take advantage of. The Industrial Assessment Center's program, Center of Excellence, funding opportunity announcement is linked here. There's also 2 notices of intent that are out there on advanced clean energy manufacturing and recycling grants, as well as on-site energy technical assistance partnerships. And these are really just a few of the deployment-focused opportunities that our offices at the department are looking at. So really take a look at some of the websites that I've linked before that may have some additional information about existing programs, ongoing programs that could be of benefit. And then next slide, please. Finally, your registration checklist. So the notice of intent, if you haven't seen it already, is linked on this slide. At the end of the notice of intent in the last pages of the documents, There is a step-by-step checklist for things to do before the funding opportunity announcement comes out. And I do want to mention that the best way to stay up to date is to register for the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations newsletter that I mentioned before. But please go to the OCED Funding Opportunity Exchange, where we anticipate publishing the FOA, and again, where you can self-nominate to be a reviewer. Grants.gov, registering here will allow you to receive automatic updates when amendments to funding opportunities are posted. The System for Awards Management, or SAM.gov, it hosts the process for designating an electronic business point of contact and obtaining a special password that's known as a marketing partner identification number. So both of these are really important steps in the process and worth doing before the FOA if you haven't already. And then after you register in SAM.gov, FedConnect is an important final step that you should go through before the FOA. So with that, next slide. I just want to thank everyone for attending this webinar. We really appreciate your enthusiasm for the opportunity and interest in this funding. As Jeremy has mentioned, and both Jill and I also highlighted in our remarks, we think this is a really incredible opportunity. We're excited and really appreciate your interest in learning more. I hope the webinar has helped illuminate some content in the notice of intent and will help you prepare for the FOA. As I mentioned, though we won't be taking questions at this time, we welcome that you submit comments for consideration to this email address. These can include anything that we should consider during the process. Though please note we can't entertain pitches for specific projects or outcomes for any current or planned financial assistance activity, including this FOA. So as I mentioned before, the recording of the webinar will be posted to our website within the next few weeks. And finally, circling back to our housekeeping, please note that as a reminder, the notice of intent remains the controlling document. If information was presented differently within this webinar from the notice of intent, you should refer to the notice of intent as the guiding document. So thank you, enjoy the rest of your day, and we appreciate your interest.